You ever pulled into a gas station somewhere off Interstate 84, somewhere between Hartford and the Massachusetts line, handed the cashier a crumpled 20 for coffee and a pack of gas station donuts, and gotten back a handful of change that included a quarter so ordinary-looking you almost missed it? I stumbled across this by accident one fall evening, the kind of evening where the New England trees are burning orange and red along the highway and the air smells like wood smoke and cold asphalt. The cashier slid the coins across the counter, a few pennies, a nickel and one quarter that caught the fluorescent light just wrong. I almost pocketed it without looking, but something about the design made me pause. It wasn't the familiar eagle, it was a tree. A massive, gnarled, ancient oak tree standing alone on the reverse of the coin, and beneath it the words, "The Charter Oak." That was my first encounter with the 1999 Connecticut State Quarter, and what I didn't know at the time was that this little 25-cent piece carried a story that winds through colonial treachery, a tree that became a monument to defiance, and a modern minting program that turned pocket change into a nationwide treasure hunt. Picture the scene not as a coin collector hunched over a magnifying glass in some climate-controlled vault, but as a traveler rolling through the Constitution State on a two-lane highway with the windows down. The 1999 Connecticut Quarter was the fifth coin released in the United States Mint's ambitious 50-state quarters program, a program that began earlier that same year and would eventually span a full decade, releasing 5 new designs annually in the order each state ratified the Constitution or joined the Union. Connecticut ratified in 1788, making it the 5th state, and so its quarter arrived in the autumn of 1999, right around October 12 if you want to be precise. By that point, Americans were already hooked. The first 4 quarters, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Georgia, had turned every cash register transaction into a mini archaeological dig. People were checking their change at drive-thrus, at toll booths, at rest stops along the turnpike. And then Connecticut showed up with a tree on it, and the story behind that tree is where the road takes a sharp turn into something genuinely extraordinary. The Charter Oak, as depicted on the coin, was a real white oak tree that stood in Hartford, Connecticut, from before European settlement until it was blown down in a violent thunderstorm on August 21, 1856. But the reason it earned its place on a quarter and in American folklore goes back to 1687. When King James II dispatched his representative, Sir Edmund Andros, to the Connecticut colony to revoke the colony's charter and absorb it into the larger dominion of New England. According to the legend, which has been passed down like a campfire story for over 3 centuries, the colonial leaders met with Andros in a dimly lit room, candles flickering, the charter laid out on a table between them. The debate was tense. Andros demanded the document. The colonists refused. And then, in a moment that sounds almost too cinematic to be true, the candles were mysteriously extinguished, some say by a gust of wind, others say by design, and when the light returned, the charter was gone. It had been secreted away, according to the story, into the hollow trunk of the great white oak that stood nearby. That tree became a symbol of colonial resistance, of self-governance, of the stubborn New England spirit that would eventually fuel the American Revolution. The coin captures that tree in all its twisted, sprawling glory, and every time you hold one, you're holding a pocket-sized monument to a moment when ordinary people said no to a king. Now here's the thing about the common value of this coin, and I want to be honest with you the way a roadside mechanic is honest about what your car actually needs versus what it doesn't. The 1999 Connecticut Quarter was minted in enormous numbers. The Philadelphia Mint produced over 688 million of them. The Denver Mint produced over 658 million. That is well over 1 billion Connecticut quarters flooding into circulation across the country, tumbling through vending machines and parking meters and tip jars from Bangor to Bakersfield. So if you find one in your change today, and you almost certainly will if you handle any cash at all, it is worth exactly 25 cents. That is the roadside honest truth. A worn, circulated, found-in-the-wild Connecticut quarter is pocket change. It is the gas station version of this treasure, the one that passes through your hands 1,000 times without you ever thinking twice about it. And that is perfectly fine because the story alone makes it worth pausing for. But if you want to find the version that makes your heart skip a beat, you need to know what to look for, and that is where the journey gets interesting. This is where the road takes a sharp turn, because while 1 billion ordinary Connecticut quarters are worth their face value and nothing more, there exists a small and genuinely thrilling subset of these coins that carry errors, varieties, and strike anomalies that can transform a 25-cent piece into something worth hundreds or even thousands of dollars. The most famous and sought-after of these is the broad-struck error. A broad-struck coin occurs when the minting press strikes the coin without the retaining collar in place. That collar is the metal ring that normally holds the blank coin in position during striking and imparts the reeded edge. Without it, the coin spreads outward, becoming wider and thinner than a standard quarter, with the design often extending beyond the normal rim and the edge appearing smooth and irregular rather than reeded. Broad-struck 1999 Connecticut quarter can sell for anywhere from $50 to several $100s depending on the degree of the error and the condition of the coin. These are the travel-worn but valuable varieties, coins that were struck wrong at the mint, slipped through quality control, and then spent years rattling around in registers and pockets before someone finally looked down and noticed something was different. But the jackpot doesn't stop there. There are also off-center strikes where the coin blank was not properly aligned with the dies when it was struck, resulting in a portion of the design being missing and a crescent of blank metal visible on one side. An off-center 1999 Connecticut quarter with a significant shift, say 5% or more, can command serious money in the collector market, particularly if the date and mint mark remain visible. Then there are the die cracks, which occur when the steel dies used to stamp the coin develop fractures from repeated use, and these cracks leave raised lines of metal on the finished coin. Some collectors specialize in die crack varieties, mapping them like geological fault lines across different die states. And let me tell you, picture the dusty old shop where this was found, a small antique store off Route 7 in northwestern Connecticut, wooden floors creaking, the smell of old books and brass polish hanging in the air, and a glass case near the register with a small tray of coins. Among them a 1999 Connecticut quarter in pristine uncirculated condition with a full strike, sharp details on every leaf of the charter oak, and a mint mark that tells you it came from Philadelphia. In MS 67 grade or higher, that is mint state, meaning uncirculated with a numerical grade of 67 on a scale that tops out at 70, one of these coins can sell for over $1,000. The record for a perfect MS 70 example, that number climbs into the thousands because so few survived without a single bag mark or contact blemish. Now there's also the silver-proof version of the Connecticut quarter, and this is the one that makes collectors lean forward in their chairs. The San Francisco Mint produced proof versions of the 1999 Connecticut quarter in two formats, a standard copper-nickel clad proof and a 90% silver proof. The silver proofs were struck on specially prepared blanks using highly polished dies, and they carry a deep mirror-like field with frosted design elements, a contrast known as cameo. The silver-proof Connecticut quarter weighs 6.25 grams compared to the standard 5.67 grams of a circulation quarter, and its edge is solid silver rather than the copper-nickel clad layers you see on regular quarters. In its original government packaging, the blue presentation box, the certificate of authenticity, a silver-proof 1999 Connecticut quarter can be worth between $15 and $40 depending on condition and whether the packaging is intact. But remove it from the packaging, grade it at PR 69 or PR 70 with deep cameo contrast, and you are looking at a coin that can fetch several $100s. These are not coins you will find in circulation. They were never released into the general money supply, but they represent the pinnacle of what the United States Mint produced for this design, and they are the treasure at the end of the road for collectors who want the absolute best version of this coin. Your roadside inspection method is this, and you can do it sitting in the cab of your truck at a rest stop with nothing but your eyes and your fingertips. Step 1. Look at the edge of the coin. A standard circulation Connecticut quarter has a reeded edge, meaning those tiny vertical grooves running around the circumference. If the edge is smooth, or if the reading is incomplete or missing in sections, you may have a broad-struck error. Hold the coin up to the light and rotate it slowly, watching how the reading catches the light. Any irregularity is worth noting. Step 2. Examine the rim. The rim should be uniform and consistent all the way around. If the coin appears wider on one side than the other, or if the design extends past where the rim should be, you are looking at a potential broad strike or off-center error. Step 3. Check the date and mint mark. The date 1999 should be crisp and fully visible on the obverse, and the mint mark, a small P for Philadelphia or D for Denver, should appear beneath the word "In God We Trust" on the front of the coin. If the mint mark is missing entirely, you may have an error coin, though missing mint marks from this era are less common than on earlier coinage. Step 4. Look at the charter oak tree on the reverse. The leaves should be individually distinguishable, and the trunk should show the characteristic gnarled texture. If the details are soft or mushy, the coin is heavily circulated and worth face value. If the details are sharp and the fields are clean, you may have an uncirculated example worth setting aside. Step 5. Feel the weight. A silver proof will feel noticeably heavier and will not show the copper-colored layer on the edge that a clad coin displays. If the edge is solid silver white all the way through, you have found something special. The historical context of this coin deserves one more pause before we hit the road again, because the charter oak story is not just a colonial anecdote. It is a thread that connects directly to the American identity that was being forged in the late 17th century and that would erupt into revolution less than a century later. When Sir Edmund Andros arrived in Hartford in 1687, he represented a monarchy that was actively trying to consolidate power over its American colonies, stripping them of their independent charters and folding them into a single administrative entity. The colonists who hid that charter in the oak tree were engaging in an act of civil disobedience that predated the Boston Tea Party by nearly a century. They were saying in effect that their rights, granted by the charter, negotiated with the crown, earned through settlement and sacrifice, were not something a distant monarch could simply revoke with a wave of his hand. That same spirit would drive the Constitutional Convention in 1787, where Connecticut's own Roger Sherman would broker the Great Compromise that gave us a bicameral legislature. So when you hold a 1999 Connecticut quarter, you are holding a coin that commemorates not just a tree but an idea. The idea that self-governance is worth hiding in the dark, worth protecting in the hollow of an ancient oak, worth fighting for across generations. The tree itself fell in 1856, its timber carved into souvenirs and furniture that are now scattered across museums and private collections. But the symbol endures, struck in copper and nickel on over 1 billion coins that have traveled every highway and byway in this country. The 50-state quarters program itself was a remarkable piece of cultural engineering, and understanding it adds another layer to why the Connecticut quarter matters. The program was conceived in the mid-1990s, championed by a numismatist named David Gantz, and eventually authorized by Congress through the United States Commemorative Coin Act of 1996. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Instead of keeping the same quarter design for decades as the mint had done since the Washington quarter was introduced in 1932, the mint would release 5 new state-themed designs each year, rotating through all 50 states over a 10-year period. The goal was twofold: to generate public interest in coin collecting, which had been declining, and to create a circulating commemorative series that would educate Americans about their own history and geography. And it worked beyond anyone's expectations. By the time the program concluded with the Hawaii quarter in 2008, it was estimated that over 140 million Americans were actively collecting the state quarters, roughly half the population. Schoolchildren collected them in cardboard maps with slots for each state. Truck drivers checked their change at every stop. Grandmothers kept jars of them on kitchen windowsills. The program generated billions of dollars in seigniorage, the profit the mint earns from the difference between a coin's face value and its production cost, because so many quarters were pulled from circulation and held in collections rather than being spent. The 1999 Connecticut quarter was part of that first wave, and being among the earliest state quarters gives it a particular resonance for collectors who remember the excitement of those first months, when every new design felt like a discovery. I want to take you back to that gas station for a moment, because the experience of finding one of these coins in the wild is part of what makes this hobby so compelling. There is something about the randomness of it. The way a coin minted in Philadelphia in 1999 can end up in your hand at a rest stop in Wyoming 15 years later, having passed through thousands of other hands first. Each of those hands is a story. A kid in New Haven who spent it on a candy bar. A toll collector in New Jersey who dropped it into a change bucket. A trucker who used it at a laundromat in Ohio. A waitress in a diner in Iowa who got it as a tip and passed it along to the next customer. Coins are the most democratic objects in American life. They do not care about your income or your address. They circulate freely through every layer of society, and every one of them carries an invisible ledger of everywhere it has been and everyone who has held it. When you find a 1999 Connecticut quarter in your change, you are holding the end of a chain that stretches back to the mint floor in Philadelphia or Denver, and the charter oak on its reverse connects you further back still, to a night in 1687 when a group of colonists decided that their rights were worth hiding in a tree. Now let me tell you about one more variety that most people walking right past it would never notice, and it involves the proof coins struck at San Francisco. Among the silver proof sets from 1999, there exists a small number of Connecticut quarters that exhibit what numismatists call a Type 2 reverse, a subtle variation in the design of the oak tree that differs from the Type 1 reverse used on the majority of proofs. The differences are minute, involving the arrangement of leaves and the depth of certain engraving details, and they are virtually invisible to the naked eye. But to a specialist, these variations are the cartography of the minting process itself, revealing which dies were used when they were retired and how the mint refined its designs over the course of a production run. A silver-proof Connecticut quarter with the Type 2 reverse graded at PR 70 deep cameo is a genuine rarity, not because it is flashy or dramatic, but because it represents a quiet, almost secret chapter in the story of this coin's production. These are the kinds of treasures that do not announce themselves. They sit in proof sets on collectors' shelves, unrecognized for years, until someone with the right knowledge and the right magnification looks closely and realizes they have been holding something that most people do not even know exists. The sensory experience of hunting for these coins is part of what makes it feel like a road trip rather than a research project. There is the weight of the coin in your palm, the slight coolness of the metal against your skin, the way the light catches the raised leaves of the oak tree when you tilt it toward a window. There is the smell of an old coin album, that particular mustiness of cardboard and adhesive and aged paper that tells you someone cared about this collection once, even if it has been sitting in an attic for 20 years. There is the sound a quarter makes when you set it on a glass display case, that bright, clear ring that tells you it is a clad coin and not a silver one, because silver produces a softer, more sustained tone. Every one of these sensory details is part of the hunt, part of the journey, and part of what transforms a 25-cent piece from currency into artifact. The 1999 Connecticut quarter, with its deeply textured oak tree and its story of colonial defiance, rewards this kind of close, patient attention more than most coins in the state quarter series, because its design is rich with detail that becomes more apparent the more time you spend with it. Let me also tell you about the designer and the engraver, because their hands are behind every one of these coins, and their work is what gives the Connecticut quarter its distinctive character. The design was created by T. James Farrell, a sculptor-engraver at the United States Mint who worked on several state quarter designs during the program's run. Farrell's depiction of the charter oak is notable for its sense of mass and age. The tree does not look like a generic oak, but like a specific ancient weatherbeaten organism that has survived centuries of wind and lightning in human history. The branches spread across the coin's surface with a kind of defiant energy, and the trunk is rendered with deep, textured bark that catches light and shadow in a way that most coin designs do not achieve. The inscription, "The Charter Oak," appears beneath the tree, and Connecticut 1788 curves along the top of the reverse, with E pluribus unum, the motto meaning out of many, one, positioned above the tree. The composition of the design is masterful in its simplicity, a single tree, standing alone, carrying the weight of an entire state's identity. It is the kind of design that makes you understand why the 50 state quarters program was so successful, because it gave each state a visual identity that could fit in the palm of your hand, and Connecticut's was among the most evocative. The condition of a coin, its grade in collector terminology, is the single most important factor in determining its value beyond face. And understanding how condition works is essential for anyone who wants to turn roadside finds into real money. A circulated Connecticut quarter, one that has been spent, handled, dropped, and passed through countless transactions, will show wear on the highest points of the design. On the obverse, that means the cheek and jaw of George Washington will be flattened, the hair details will be soft, and the lettering around the rim may show contact marks. On the reverse, the leaves of the charter oak will lose their individual definition and the trunk's bark texture will smooth out. A coin in this condition is worth face value, period. But an uncirculated coin, one that was struck at the mint, placed into a mint-sewn bag and never released into general circulation, will retain full detail on every element of the design. The leaves will be crisp and separate, the bark will show its full texture, and Washington's portrait will retain its original relief. These uncirculated examples are what collectors pursue, and within the uncirculated range, the grade depends on the presence and severity of contact marks, tiny nicks and scratches that occur when coins strike each other during handling and transportation. A coin with no visible marks at 5 times magnification grades higher than one with scattered marks, and the price difference between an MS-63 and an MS-67 can be dramatic, from a few dollars to several hundred. What makes the 1999 Connecticut quarter particularly interesting from a collector's perspective is that it sits at the intersection of abundance and scarcity. Over 1 billion were minted, so the coin itself is not rare. But high-grade examples, coins that survived the minting process without a single significant mark, are genuinely scarce, because the early years of the state quarter program were produced under enormous pressure to meet demand, and quality control was not always as rigorous as it would become in later years. Many 1999 quarters show what collectors call bag marks, small nicks caused by coins tumbling against each other in large canvas mint bags, and finding one that is completely clean is harder than you might think. This is the paradox of modern coin collecting. The coins are everywhere, but the perfect ones are not. And that is what makes the hunt exciting. You are not searching for something that is hidden. You are searching for something that is hiding in plain sight, surrounded by a billion near-identical companions, waiting for someone with a sharp eye and a little patience to pick it out of the crowd. But pack your bags, because the next coin takes us somewhere entirely unexpected. Let's move on to our second coin. On July 19, 1999, something arrived in cash registers across America that nobody was prepared for. It looked like an ordinary quarter. It spent like an ordinary quarter, but beneath its surface, it carried a trail of evidence that most people have walked right past for over 2 decades. I'm talking about the 1999 Georgia State Quarter, the fourth coin released in the United States Mint's 50 State Quarters program, and if you've ever dismissed one of these as pocket change, you might want to reconsider. The evidence doesn't lie, and what it tells us about this particular coin is stranger than anything you'd expect from a 25-cent piece minted nearly a quarter century ago. Let me walk you through the crime scene. The Georgia Quarter hit circulation in the summer of 1999, following Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey into the hands of an American public that was, frankly, going coin crazy. The Mint had struck hundreds of millions of these things, over 451 million at the Philadelphia Mint alone, and another 451 million plus at Denver, and they flooded into every register, every tip jar, every toll basket from Savannah to Seattle. The design itself was chosen through a statewide competition in Georgia, and the winner featured a peach, the fruit most associated with the state, surrounded by a border of live oak branches with Spanish moss dripping from them, the state outline in the background, and the motto "Wisdom, Justice, Moderation" inscribed across a banner beneath the peach. It was designed by John Garrett, a resident of Roswell, Georgia, and engraved by Thomas Rogers, a veteran Mint sculptor engraver. On the surface, it was a clean, straightforward commemorative design. But surface appearances, as any good investigator will tell you, are where the real story begins to diverge from the official narrative. The year 1999 itself was a year defined by scandal, deception, and high-stakes fraud, and I'm not just talking about the coin world. While the Georgia Quarter was rolling off the presses, the United States was reeling from one of the most audacious financial crimes of the decade. In the spring and summer of 1999, the nation was gripped by the unfolding drama of the Clinton impeachment trial, which had concluded in February with an acquittal, but left a permanent scar on the American political landscape. But more relevant to our investigation was a different kind of crime: the rise of a massive counterfeiting operation that had been quietly flooding the southeastern United States with bogus currency throughout the late 1990s. In Atlanta, federal agents were actively investigating a ring that had been producing high-quality counterfeit $20 bills using advanced inkjet printing technology, a crime wave that had begun around 1998 and would continue into the early 2000s. The Secret Service, the agency originally founded to combat counterfeiting before it took on presidential protection duties, was stretched thin chasing these bills through Georgia, Florida, and the Carolinas. And right in the middle of this climate of financial suspicion, the Mint released a quarter bearing the image of a Georgia peach, a symbol so tied to the state's agricultural identity that it became, almost overnight, one of the most recognizable coins in American circulation. The irony is thick enough to cut with a knife. While counterfeiters were pumping fake 20s into Georgia's economy, the real government was pumping hundreds of millions of genuine quarters into that same economy, each one a tiny, stamped, verified piece of federal authority. Now let's talk about the common value, because the prosecution has to present its baseline before it can introduce the extraordinary evidence. A circulated 1999 Georgia quarter, one that has been through the wash, dropped on a parking lot, spent at a McDonald's drive-thru, and rattled around in a cup holder for years, is worth exactly 25 cents. That is the plead guilty value. No negotiation, no appeal, no leniency. Over 900 million of these coins were produced between the two mints. And the vast majority of them are still in circulation today, doing exactly what they were designed to do: buying gum, feeding parking meters, and passing through hands without a second glance. If you find one in your change tomorrow, it is a quarter. It is not a treasure. It is not a retirement plan. It is a piece of metal with a peach on it, and the honest, roadside truth value is its face value. But the prosecution is not done. Because within that population of 900 million coins, there exists a small fraction, a sliver of a fraction, that carries evidence of something gone wrong at the Mint. And those coins are where this investigation takes a hard turn into territory that will make you look at every Georgia quarter you ever touch from this moment forward with a completely different set of eyes. This is the fingerprint that cracks the case. The most significant and documented error variety associated with the 1999 Georgia quarter is what numismatists refer to as the mule error possibility, but more concretely and more commonly encountered, the die crack varieties that emerged from the early production runs at the Philadelphia Mint. During the initial striking of the Georgia quarter, the steel dies used to impress the design onto the copper-nickel clad blanks were subjected to enormous pressure, tons of force per strike, and over the course of tens of thousands of impressions, those dies began to develop microscopic fractures. These fractures are not visible on the die itself to the naked eye, but when the die strikes a coin, the metal flows into those fracture lines, creating raised lines of metal on the finished coin that perfectly mirror the crack pattern in the die. These are called die cracks, and on the 1999 Georgia quarter, they appear most frequently around the peach and along the live oak branches on the reverse. The die crack that runs through the peach, bisecting it or creating what looks like a line emanating from the fruit, is a documented variety that collectors track and pursue. The more dramatic the crack, the more valuable the coin. A Georgia quarter with a prominent die crack running diagonally across the reverse can sell for $10 to $50 to the right collector, and a coin with multiple intersecting die cracks, what specialists call a cracked die state, can command even more. But the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that transforms this from a curiosity into a genuine treasure hunt, is the broadstruck error. A broadstruck Georgia quarter occurs when the retaining collar, that critical metal ring that holds the coin blank in position during the strike and forms the reeded edge, fails to engage properly, and the coin is struck without confinement. The result is a coin that is visibly wider than a standard quarter, with the design spreading outward beyond the normal diameter, and the edge appearing smooth and irregular rather than reeded. A broadstruck 1999 Georgia quarter is immediately recognizable to anyone who knows what to look for. It looks wrong. It looks like a quarter that has been flattened, stretched, and pushed beyond its intended boundaries, and in the collector market, these coins are genuinely valuable. A broadstruck Georgia quarter in circulated condition can sell for $75 to $150. In uncirculated condition, meaning it was struck, never released into general circulation, and preserved in its original mint state, the value can climb to several $100s, with the most pristine examples reaching toward $1,000 at auction. These are the coins that were struck wrong, slipped past quality control at the Philadelphia or Denver Mint, entered the money supply, and have been hiding in plain sight ever since. The evidence doesn't lie, and here is where it gets even more compelling. There are also off-center strikes documented on the 1999 Georgia quarter, and these are among the most visually dramatic errors in the entire state quarter series. An off-center strike occurs when the coin blank is not properly aligned with the dies. It is shifted to one side and the strike impresses the design off-center, leaving a crescent of blank metal on one edge and cutting off part of the design on the opposite edge. The degree of off-centering is measured as a percentage. A 5% off-center strike means the design is shifted by that amount, and the higher the percentage, the more dramatic and valuable the error. 1999 Georgia quarter struck 10% off-center with the date and mint mark still visible, can sell for $100 to $300. A coin struck 20% or more off-center, where a significant portion of the design is missing and a large crescent of blank metal is visible, can command $500 or more, particularly if the coin is in uncirculated condition. These are the fingerprints, the unique identifiers that separate a common coin from a case file worth opening. Now let me walk you through the crime scene one more time, because there is another layer to this investigation that most people miss entirely. The Georgia quarter's design includes the state outline, and that outline has been the subject of debate among numismatists and geographers alike since the coin's release. The outline as depicted on the quarter does not perfectly match the actual geographic boundaries of the state of Georgia. The shape is slightly simplified, slightly stylized, and certain border details, particularly along the western edge where Georgia meets Alabama, are not rendered with cartographic precision. This is not technically an error because the Mint approved the design as submitted, but it is a detail that has fueled endless discussion among collectors and has become part of the lore surrounding this coin. Some collectors view it as a flaw that adds character, while others see it as a reminder that even official government products carry imperfections. Imperfections that, in the world of coin collecting, can sometimes translate into value because they make a coin more interesting, more talked about, and more sought after by people who appreciate the story behind the object. The silver-proof version of the 1999 Georgia quarter is another piece of evidence that belongs in this case file. The San Francisco Mint produced proof coins for the Georgia quarter in two formats, a standard copper-nickel clad proof and a 90% silver proof. The silver proofs were struck on specially prepared blanks using highly polished dies, and they exhibit a deep mirror-like field with frosted design elements that create a cameo contrast. The silver-proof Georgia quarter weighs 6.25 grams compared to the standard circulation quarter's 5.67 grams, and its edge is solid silver rather than showing the copper-colored layer characteristic of clad coins. In its original government packaging, the blue presentation box with the certificate of authenticity, a silver-proof Georgia quarter is worth between $15 and $40. But graded at PR 69 or PR 70 deep cameo by a professional grading service, the value increases significantly, with the finest examples reaching several $100s. These coins were never released into circulation, so you will not find one in your change at a Waffle House, but they represent the highest quality version of this design that the Mint produced, and they are the gold standard, or rather, the silver standard, for collectors who want the absolute best example of the 1999 Georgia quarter. Your evidence collection protocol is this, and I want you to treat it like a crime scene technician would treat a piece of physical evidence, methodically, carefully, and with full documentation. Step 1. Acquire the coin and do not clean it. This is the most important rule in all of coin collecting and the one most frequently broken by people who do not know better. Cleaning a coin, rubbing it with a cloth, scrubbing it with a brush, dipping it in a cleaning solution destroys its natural surface and reduces its value, sometimes to zero. A coin's tunning, its natural oxidation and coloration is part of its history and its appeal. Leave it alone. Step 2. Examine the edge. Hold the coin between your thumb and forefinger and rotate it slowly under a good light source. A standard circulation Georgia quarter has a reeded edge with uniform vertical grooves. If the edge is smooth or if the reading is missing or incomplete, you may have a broad stroke error. Document what you see. Step 3. Measure the diameter. A standard quarter measures 24.3 millimeters across. If your coin is visibly wider even by a millimeter or two, you may have a broad strike. Use a ruler or better yet a caliper if you have one. Step 4. Examine the reverse under magnification. A 5-power loop, which costs about $10 at any hobby shop, is sufficient for initial examination. Look at the peach. Look at the live oak branches. Look for raised lines crossing the surface of the design. These are die cracks and they are your fingerprints. Photograph any anomalies you find with the coin under consistent lighting and note the location and direction of any cracks. Step 5. Check the date and mint mark. The date 1999 should be fully visible and sharp on the obverse, and the mint mark, a small P for Philadelphia or D for Denver, should appear below the motto, "In God We Trust." If the mint mark is missing, doubled, or misplaced, you have a potential error that warrants further investigation. Step 6. Weigh the coin. A standard clad quarter weighs 5.67 grams. A silver proof weighs 6.25 grams. If your coin weighs significantly more or less than the standard, something is off and that something may be valuable. Record the weight. Step 7. Place the coin in a non-abrasive holder, a mylar flip, or a certified coin slab if you intend to submit it for grading, and label it with the date, mint mark, and any observed anomalies. You have now bagged and tagged your evidence. The historical context deepens when you consider what was happening in Georgia specifically during 1999, because the state was undergoing a transformation that made the release of this coin feel particularly resonant. Atlanta was still in the process of reinventing itself after the 1996 Olympics, which had brought billions of dollars in infrastructure investment and global attention to the city. The state's population was booming, driven by immigration and domestic migration from the Northeast and Midwest, and Georgia was transitioning from its agricultural roots, the very roots symbolized by the peach on the quarter, into a modern economy driven by logistics, technology, and film production. The peach on the coin was, in a sense, a nostalgic emblem for a state that was rapidly becoming something else entirely. And yet, the choice to feature the peach, the live oak, and the state motto, wisdom, justice, moderation, was a deliberate one, a statement that despite the changes, despite the growth, despite the scandals and the counterfeiting rings and the political turbulence of the era, Georgia still identified with its roots. The coin was a declaration of identity at a moment when that identity was being stretched and reshaped, and that tension between the old Georgia and the new Georgia is embedded in every one of the 900 million quarters that were struck that year. The designer, John Garrett, deserves a moment in the investigative spotlight, because his vision for this coin was more layered than most people realize. Garrett was not a professional artist or a Mint employee. He was an ordinary citizen, a resident of Roswell, Georgia, who submitted his design concept to the statewide competition that the Georgia Department of Revenue and the governor's office organized to select the quarter's imagery. His design was chosen from among thousands of submissions, and it was then refined and engraved by Thomas Rogers, a mint sculptor, engraver who was responsible for several state quarter designs during the program's run. The collaboration between a citizen designer and a professional engraver is part of what gives the Georgia quarter its distinctive feel. It has the earnestness of an amateur's vision combined with the technical precision of a professional's execution. The peach is rendered with a degree of naturalism that makes it recognizable as a specific fruit rather than a generic circle, and the live oak branches with their hanging Spanish moss create a frame that evokes the coastal landscapes of Savannah and the Barrier Islands. The motto, Wisdom, Justice, Moderation, adopted by the state in 1798, anchors the design in Georgia's early statehood, connecting the modern coin to the founding generation that established the state's first constitution. Every element of the design was deliberate, and understanding that deliberateness is part of reading the evidence correctly. The condition of the coin, its state of preservation, is the final piece of evidence in our case file, and it is the factor that most often determines whether a 1999 Georgia quarter is worth 25 cents or $2,500. A circulated coin, one that has been handled, spent, and exposed to the wear and tear of daily commerce, will show flattening on the highest points of the design. On the obverse, George Washington's cheek and jaw will be smoothed, the hair details will be soft, and the lettering around the rim may show contact marks and abrasion. On the reverse, the peach will lose its surface texture, the Spanish moss will blur, and the state outline will become less defined. A coin in this condition is worth face value, and no amount of wishing will change that. But an uncirculated coin, one that was struck at the mint, placed into a mint-sewn bag and never released into the wild of general circulation, will retain full detail on every element. The peach will show its original surface texture, the oak leaves will be individually defined, and Washington's portrait will retain its full relief. Within the uncirculated range, the grade depends on the severity and number of contact marks, those tiny nicks that occur when coins strike each other during handling. A coin with no visible marks at 5 times magnification grades at MS67 or higher, and a 1999 Georgia quarter in MS67 or MS68 condition, particularly from the Philadelphia Mint, where early state quarter production was known for inconsistent quality, can sell for several hundred to over $1,000. The MS70 grade, representing a theoretically perfect coin, is extraordinarily rare for this issue and commands a premium that reflects that rarity. What makes the 1999 Georgia quarter a genuinely compelling case, one worth reopening every time you receive one in change, is the combination of sheer abundance and hidden scarcity. 900 million coins were struck, and the overwhelming majority are common, circulated, and worth exactly what they say they are worth. But within that massive population, there are broad-struck errors, off-center strikes, die-crack varieties, silver proofs, and high-grade uncirculated examples that represent a tiny elusive minority. These are the coins that were struck wrong, that survived the mint's quality control filters, that entered circulation or were preserved by chance, and that now sit in registers and jars and coin albums waiting to be identified by someone who knows what the evidence looks like. The hunt is not for something hidden, it is for something hiding. The Georgia quarter is one of the most common coins in American circulation, and that is precisely what makes the rare varieties within it so difficult to find and so rewarding to identify. You are not searching for a needle in a haystack. You are searching for a specific needle in a haystack full of needles that look almost identical, and the difference between the common and the extraordinary is measured in millimeters, grams, and the presence of a hairline crack that most eyes will never see. The sensory experience of examining one of these coins, of holding it up to the light and turning it slowly, watching the peach catch the glare and the Spanish moss cast tiny shadows across the surface, is part of what makes this investigation feel real rather than theoretical. There is the cool weight of the coin in your palm. There is the faint metallic smell of copper and nickel that clings to your fingertips after handling a handful of quarters. There's the sound the coin makes when you set it on a hard surface, that bright ringing ping that tells you it is a clad coin and not a silver one, because silver produces a softer, more resonant tone that lasts longer. There is the way the light plays differently across the frosted proof version compared to the matte circulation version, the way the cameo contrast on a silver proof makes the peach look almost three-dimensional, as if you could reach into the coin and pluck it from the branch. Every one of these sensory details is a piece of evidence, a clue that helps you determine what you are holding and whether it deserves a place in your case file or a trip back to the cash register. The 50 state quarters program, of which the Georgia quarter was such an integral part, was itself a kind of cultural crime scene, not in the sense of wrongdoing, but in the sense that it fundamentally altered the landscape of American numismatics in ways that are still being investigated and understood today. The program generated an estimated 140 million new collectors, many of them children who received state quarter maps as gifts and spent years filling in the slots. It generated billions in seigniorage for the mint, as coins were pulled from circulation and held in collections. And it created a framework for examining American history through a numismatic lens: 50 designs, 50 stories, 50 states, each one a tiny engraved narrative that fit in the palm of your hand. The Georgia Quarter, with its peach and its oak and its motto of wisdom, justice, and moderation, was the fourth chapter in that narrative, and it remains one of the most recognizable and most widely circulated coins in the entire series. But recognition is not the same as understanding, and the difference between someone who recognizes the Georgia Quarter and someone who understands it, who knows its errors, its varieties, its silver proofs, and its high-grade rarities, is the difference between a witness and an investigator. But the case isn't closed yet. The next coin has a trail that goes colder than ice. Let's move on to our third coin. My grandfather told me this when I was young. He said the most valuable things in this world are the ones sitting right in front of you, collecting dust, while you walk past them every single day. He was talking about a lot of things back then, but he could have been talking about the 2003 Arkansas State Quarter. Because this little coin, released in October of 2003 as the 25th entry in the United States Mint's 50 State Quarters program, has been passing through hands, jars, drawers, and old coffee cans on kitchen shelves for over 2 decades now, and most people who own one have never looked at it closely enough to understand what they are actually holding. Let me take you back to a simpler time, to an attic where the light comes through a single dormer window and falls across a shoebox full of coins that nobody has opened since the Bush administration. And let me show you why this particular quarter deserves more attention than it has ever gotten. The Arkansas Quarter is the kind of coin that carries a quiet beauty most people never pause to appreciate. The reverse design features 3 distinct elements arranged in a careful, layered composition: a large diamond at the center, representing Crater of Diamonds State Park near Murfreesboro, the only public diamond-bearing site in the world where visitors can dig for gems and keep what they find. Behind the diamond, a mallard duck flies low over a body of water, its wings spread wide, its body angled as if descending toward the surface. And flanking the diamond on either side are stalks of rice, bowing gently, paying tribute to Arkansas's status as one of the leading rice-producing states in the nation. The design was created by John Mercanti, one of the most prolific sculptor engravers in the history of the United States Mint, and it was engraved by Norman Nemeth. The inscription reads Arkansas across the top with 1836, the year Arkansas was admitted to the Union as the 25th state, and 2003, the year of the coin's release. Beneath the diamond, the motto E pluribus unum appears in small, precise lettering. It is a design that rewards close looking, the kind of looking you do when you are sitting at a kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with nothing pressing on your schedule and a magnifying glass that has been in the family for 3 generations. Let me take you back to a simpler time, to the world of 2003, when this coin first entered circulation. Picture the American family dinner table that autumn. The war in Iraq had begun in March of that year, and families across the country were gathered around television sets watching the news with a mixture of anxiety and resolve. The Space Shuttle Columbia had disintegrated on re-entry in February, killing all 7 astronauts aboard, and the nation was still processing that grief. But life went on, as it always does. Children were playing with Game Boy Advances and watching Finding Nemo on DVD. Sunday dinners were pot roasts and mashed potatoes and green bean casserole made with canned soup and crispy fried onions, the kind of meal that filled the whole house with a warmth that had nothing to do with the thermostat. And somewhere in the middle of all of that ordinary life, the Arkansas Quarter arrived in change purses and cash register drawers across the country, and families who had been collecting the state quarters since 1999 added another one to the cardboard map on the refrigerator. Nobody was thinking about value. Nobody was thinking about errors or varieties or mint marks. They were thinking about the diamond on the coin and the duck flying over the water, and they were thinking about the fact that somewhere in Arkansas, you could actually dig for real diamonds in a state park and keep whatever you found. That was the magic of this coin. It was a treasure map pressed into metal. The Crater of Diamonds connection is worth lingering on because it is what gives this quarter its soul. Crater of Diamonds State Park, located in Pike County, Arkansas, sits on top of an ancient volcanic pipe, a geological formation that brought diamonds from deep within the Earth's mantle up to the surface nearly 100 million years ago. The site was originally a private mining operation in the early 20th century, But after commercial mining proved unprofitable, the land was purchased by the state of Arkansas in 1972 and opened to the public as a park where anyone could search for diamonds for a small entrance fee. Since its opening, visitors have found tens of thousands of diamonds there, including the Uncle Sam diamond, the largest diamond ever discovered in North America, which was found in 1924 and weighed 40.23 carats in its rough form. The diamond depicted on the Arkansas quarter is a direct reference to this park, and it is the only United States coin that features a diamond as a central design element. When you hold this coin, you are holding a piece of that story, the idea that treasure is not always hidden in vaults or buried in pirate chests, but sometimes it is sitting in a field in Arkansas, waiting for someone with a shovel and enough patience to dig. Now, let me be gentle but honest with you about the common value, the way a grandfather is honest when he tells you that the old truck in the barn is not worth what you think it is. The Philadelphia Mint produced over 383 million Arkansas quarters. The Denver Mint produced over 337 million. That is over 720 million coins, and the overwhelming majority of them are still in circulation today, doing what quarters do, feeding parking meters, buying gumballs, and rattling around in the cup holders of minivans from Little Rock to Bangor. A circulated 2003 Arkansas quarter, one that has been handled, spent, dropped on sidewalks, and passed through countless cash registers, is worth exactly 25 cents. That is the gentle, honest truth. If you inherited a jar of coins from a family member and there is an Arkansas quarter in there, worn smooth from years of handling, with the duck's wings softened and the diamond's facets blurred and the rice stalks barely distinguishable, it is a quarter. It is a family heirloom that carries sentimental value and historical significance, but it is not going to pay off a mortgage. Not in that condition, not in that form. This is the kind of thing families fight over, and here is where the story changes. Because within that population of 720 million Arkansas quarters, there are varieties and errors that are genuinely valuable coins that were struck wrong at the mint, that carry anomalies invisible to the casual observer, and that have been hiding in inherited collections and old coin jars for over 20 years. The most significant and documented of these is the broad-struck error, which occurs when the retaining collar, the metal ring that holds the coin blank in position during the striking process and imparts the reeded edge, fails to engage, and the coin is struck without confinement. The result is a coin that spreads outward, becoming wider and thinner than a standard quarter, with the design extending beyond the normal rim and the edge appearing smooth and irregular. A broad-struck 2003 Arkansas quarter is immediately recognizable to anyone who knows what to look for. It looks larger than it should, and the edge is wrong. In circulated condition, a broad-struck Arkansas quarter can sell for $50 to $150. In uncirculated condition, the value climbs higher, with pristine examples reaching several $100s at auction. These are the coins that were struck incorrectly, passed through the mint's quality control, entered circulation, and have been sitting unrecognized in family collections ever since. But the family heirloom that pays off the mortgage, the one that makes you sit down hard in a chair when you realize what you have, is the off-center strike. An off-center 2003 Arkansas quarter occurs when the coin blank is misaligned with the dies during striking, causing the design to be impressed off to one side, leaving a crescent of blank metal visible on one edge and cutting off a portion of the design on the opposite edge. The degree of misalignment is measured as a percentage, and the higher the percentage, the more dramatic and valuable the error. A 5% off-center Arkansas quarter is a modest find, worth perhaps $25 to $50. But a coin struck 15 or 20% off-center, with the date and mint mark still visible and the design clearly identifiable, can command $300 to $700 or more. And the truly dramatic off-center strikes, coins shifted so far that a large portion of the blank surface is exposed and the design is only partially visible, can exceed $1,000 at auction, particularly if the coin is in uncirculated condition. These are the coins that families unknowingly pass down through generations, tucked into envelopes and old jewelry boxes, never examined closely because they look wrong and people assume that wrong means worthless, when in fact wrong is where the value lives. My grandfather told me this when I was young, and it took me years to understand what he meant. He said the things that look broken are sometimes the things that are worth the most. And that is precisely the case with the die-crack varieties on the 2003 Arkansas quarter. During the minting process, the steel dies used to strike the design into the coin blanks were subjected to enormous pressure, tons of force per strike, and over the course of tens of thousands of impressions, those dies develop microscopic fractures. These fractures are invisible on the die itself, but when the die strikes a coin, the metal flows into the crack lines, creating raised lines of metal on the finished coin that perfectly mirror the fracture pattern in the die. On the Arkansas quarter, die cracks appear most frequently around the diamond and along the rice stalks, and a prominent die crack, one that is clearly visible to the naked eye or under low magnification, can add $10 to $50 to the coin's value, with more complex crack patterns commanding more. These are not dramatic, attention-grabbing errors like broad strikes or off-center strikes, but they are the kind of quiet, subtle anomaly that a careful family heirloom check can uncover, and they represent the kind of treasure that rewards patience and attention rather than luck. The silver-proof version of the 2003 Arkansas quarter is another piece of this story, and it is the one that most often shows up in inherited collections because proof sets were popular gifts in the early 2000s, the kind of thing a grandparent might have ordered from the mint and kept on a shelf in its original blue presentation box with the certificate of authenticity tucked inside. The San Francisco Mint produced proof Arkansas quarters in two formats, a standard copper-nickel clad proof and a 90% silver proof. The silver proofs were struck on specially prepared blanks using highly polished dies, and they exhibit a deep, mirror-like field with frosted design elements that create what numismatists call a cameo contrast. The silver-proof Arkansas quarter weighs 6.25 grams compared to the standard circulation quarter's 5.67 grams, and its edge is solid silver-white rather than showing the copper-colored layer characteristic of clad coins. In its original government packaging, a silver-proof 2003 Arkansas quarter is worth between $15 and $35. Graded at PR69 or PR70 deep cameo by a professional grading service, meaning the coin is nearly perfect or perfect, with full cameo contrast and no visible imperfections even under magnification, the value can reach several $100s. These are the coins that were never meant to circulate, that were struck to be preserved, and that represent the absolute highest quality version of this design that the mint produced. Your family heirloom check works like this, and I want you to approach it the way you would approach sorting through a grandparent's belongings, with care, with patience, and with respect for the fact that these objects carry memories as well as metal. Step 1. Wash and dry your hands. Do not use hand sanitizer, which contains alcohol and other chemicals that can leave residue on the coin's surface. Your natural skin oils are gentler than any chemical, but even those should be minimized. Step 2. Set up your examination space. You want a clean, soft surface, a felt mat, a microfiber cloth, or even a clean dish towel, and a good light source. Natural daylight from a window is ideal, but a desk lamp with a white bulb works perfectly well. Step 3. Pick up the coin by its edges, never by its faces. Your fingertips carry oils and microscopic particles that can leave marks on the coin's surface over time, and those marks are permanent. Hold the coin between your thumb and forefinger at the rim, the way you would hold a photograph you do not want to smudge. Step 4. Examine the edge first. Rotate the coin slowly under your light and look at the reading, those tiny vertical grooves that run around the circumference. A standard circulation Arkansas quarter has uniform, complete reading. If the edge is smooth, if the reading is missing in sections, or if the coin appears wider than a normal quarter, you may have a broad struck error. Set it aside and note what you observed. Step 5. Examine the obverse, the front of the coin, with George Washington's portrait. Look at the date 2003 and the mint mark, which appears below the motto, "In God We Trust." A small p means Philadelphia, a small d means Denver. If the mint mark is missing, doubled, or appears to be in an unusual position, you have a potential error. Step 6. Turn the coin over and examine the reverse, the side with the diamond, the duck, and the rice. Look at the diamond. Are the facets sharp and distinct, or have they been worn smooth? Look at the duck's wings. Are the individual feathers visible? Look at the rice stalks. Can you see the individual grains? The sharper and more detailed these elements are, the higher the condition of the coin, and condition is the single most important factor in determining value beyond face. Step 7. Look for raised lines crossing the surface of the design. These are die cracks, and they appear as thin, raised ridges of metal that can run in any direction. A die crack through the diamond or across the duck's body is a documented variety that collectors pursue. Step 8. If you have a loop or magnifying glass, use it now. 5-power magnification is sufficient for initial examination. Look for anything that seems irregular, doubling of the design, misplaced letters, extra metal where it should not be. Step 9. Weigh the coin if you have a scale sensitive enough to measure to the hundredth of a gram. A clad quarter weighs 5.67 grams. A silver proof weighs 6.25 grams. If your coin weighs significantly more or less than the standard, something is unusual, and that unusual quality may translate into value. Step 10. Do not clean the coin. I will say this again because it is the most important and most violated rule in all of coin collecting. Do not clean the coin. Do not rub it, do not polish it, do not dip it in anything. A coin's natural tunning, the colors it develops over decades of exposure to air and handling, is part of its character and its value. Cleaning strips that character away and in many cases reduces the coin's value by half or more. Place the coin in a non-abrasive holder, a mylar flip, a cardboard 2x2 with a clear window or a plastic coin tube, and label it with the date, mint mark, and any anomalies you observed. Let me take you back to a simpler time again, because the context of 2003 matters for understanding why these coins show up in family collections the way they do. In 2003, the 50-state quarters program was at its midpoint. 25 states had been honored, 25 remained, and the program had become a genuine cultural phenomenon. An estimated 140 million Americans were actively collecting the quarters, which meant that families were not just spending them but saving them, organizing them, and passing them down. Children who had started collecting in 1999 were now teenagers, and their collections had grown from a few coins in a jar to complete or nearly complete sets in cardboard folders. Grandparents who had ordered proof sets from the mint every year were accumulating small collections that would eventually be discovered in attics and basements and safe deposit boxes. The Arkansas quarter, arriving in October 2003, was the last state quarter released that year, and it was met with the same enthusiasm that had greeted every previous release. Families gathered around kitchen tables and examined the design, the diamond, the duck, the rice, and talked about what they knew about Arkansas. Which for most Americans outside the South was not very much. But the coin was a conversation starter, a tiny piece of education that fit in your palm, and that is part of what made the program so successful. It turned every transaction into an opportunity to learn something about a place you might never visit. The Arkansas quarter also carries a historical resonance that connects to the state's deeper past in ways that are worth understanding. Arkansas became a state on June 15, 1836, admitted as the 25th state and the 13th slave state, a fact that sits heavily in the historical record alongside the coin's cheerful imagery. The state's history includes the Trail of Tears, which passed through Arkansas territory in the 1830s as thousands of Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, and Seminole people were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands in the southeast and marched to Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma. The rice industry depicted on the coin has its own complex history. Rice cultivation in Arkansas was introduced in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, transforming the Grand Prairie region into one of the most productive rice-growing areas in the world. But it was built on land that had been taken from indigenous peoples and worked in its early years by sharecroppers who lived in conditions that were far from the pastoral ideal the coin suggests. The diamond on the coin represents a geological wonder, but it also represents a commercial enterprise that failed before it became a public park. Every element of the Arkansas quarter's design carries a layered history, and understanding those layers is part of what makes holding one of these coins feel like holding a piece of the American story, not a sanitized version, but a real one with all its beauty and all its weight. The condition of an inherited Arkansas quarter is the factor that most often determines whether it stays in the family jar or goes to auction, and understanding how condition works is essential for anyone sorting through a relative's collection. A circulated coin, one that has been handled, spent, and exposed to the wear of daily commerce, will show flattening on the highest points of the design. On the obverse, Washington's cheek and jaw will be smoothed, the hair details will be soft, and the lettering may show contact marks and abrasion. On the reverse, the diamond will lose its facet definition, the duck's feathers will blur together, and the rice stalks will lose their individual grain detail. A coin in this condition is worth face value, and that is a gentle truth that should be accepted without disappointment, because the coin still carries its story and its history regardless of its monetary worth. But an uncirculated coin, one that was struck at the mint, placed into a mint-sewn bag and never released into the wild of general circulation, will retain full detail on every element. The diamond will show its facets, the duck's feathers will be individually defined, and the rice stalks will be crisp and clear. Within the uncirculated range, the grade depends on the severity and number of contact marks, and a 2003 Arkansas quarter graded MS 67 or higher, meaning it has no visible marks at 5 times magnification, can sell for several $100s, with the finest known examples reaching toward $1,000 or more at auction. The sensory experience of examining an inherited coin is part of what makes this process feel less like an appraisal and more like a conversation with the past. There is the weight of the coin in your palm, that small, specific heft that is different from a dime or a nickel, a weight you learned to recognize as a child when your grandfather let you hold the coins in his collection. There is the smell of the old folder or envelope the coin has been stored in, that particular mustiness of aged paper and cardboard and adhesive that tells you this collection has been sitting undisturbed for years, maybe decades. There is the way the light falls across the surface of the coin when you hold it at an angle, revealing the depth of the design. The way the diamond seems to catch and hold the light differently from the surrounding field, the way the duck's wings cast tiny shadows that give the bird a sense of motion even though it is fixed in metal. There's the sound the coin makes when you set it down on a soft surface, a muffled tap rather than a bright ring, because you are being careful, because you know this coin has been in someone's keeping for a long time and you want to honor that. Every one of these sensory details is part of the inheritance, part of the experience of connecting with a family member through the objects they chose to save. This is the kind of thing families fight over, and I do not mean that metaphorically. I mean that inherited coin collections are a genuine source of family conflict, because the objects carry emotional weight that makes rational distribution difficult. One sibling wants the coins because they remember their father talking about them. Another sibling wants them because they perceive them as valuable, even when they are not. A third sibling does not care about the coins at all but does not want the others to have them. And in the middle of all of that, there is the 2003 Arkansas quarter, a coin that is, in its common form, worth 25 cents, but that in its rare forms can be worth hundreds or thousands of dollars, and the difference between those two outcomes depends entirely on whether someone in the family knows what to look for. The broad strikes, the off-center strikes, the die-crack varieties, the silver proofs in their original packaging, the high-grade uncirculated examples, these are the coins that can transform a jar of pocket change into a meaningful financial discovery, but only if someone takes the time to examine them carefully and honestly, with the kind of patient attention that a grandfather would have given them. The designer and engraver of the Arkansas quarter deserve a final moment of recognition, because their work is what gives this coin its enduring appeal. John Mercanti, who created the design, served as the 12th chief engraver of the United States Mint, and is responsible for more coin and metal designs than any other engraver in the Mint's history, over 100 designs during his career, including the reverse of the American Silver Eagle, one of the most widely produced bullion coins in the world. Mercanti's approach to the Arkansas quarter was characteristically precise and balanced. The three elements of the design are arranged in a way that feels natural rather than crowded, with the diamond as the focal point, the duck providing motion and life, and the rice stalks framing the composition with a sense of agricultural abundance. Norman Nemeth, who engraved the design, brought Mercanti's vision to the steel dies with a level of detail that is apparent even on circulated examples. The texture of the duck's feathers, the individual grains of the rice, the geometric facets of the diamond are all rendered with a crispness that speaks to the skill of the engraver and the quality of the Mint's production process in the early 2000s. Understanding the hands that made the coin is part of understanding the coin itself, and it adds a layer of appreciation that goes beyond value. It connects you to the people who designed and struck and released this object into the world, where it eventually found its way into your family's keeping. What makes the 2003 Arkansas quarter a genuinely meaningful coin? The kind that is worth more than its metal content even when it is not worth more than its face value, is the way it captures a specific moment in American cultural history while also reaching back into the deeper history of the state it represents. The 50 State Quarters program was at its peak in 2003, and the Arkansas quarter arrived at a moment when Americans were actively engaged with their own currency in a way they had not been for generations and would not be again after the program concluded. Families were collecting, learning, and talking about states they had never visited, and the Arkansas quarter, with its diamond and its duck and its rice, gave them a reason to learn about Crater of Diamond State Park, about the rice farms of the Grand Prairie, about the mallard hunting traditions of the Mississippi Flyway. That educational function is part of the coin's legacy, and it is part of what makes holding one today feel like holding a piece of a shared national experience that was, for a few years in the early 2000s, genuinely unifying. The rare varieties, the errors, the proofs, the high-grade examples, are the financial treasures hidden within that cultural legacy, and finding one in a family collection is the moment when nostalgia and value converge. When the coin your grandfather saved because it was interesting turns out to be the coin that is also, quietly and unexpectedly, valuable. But the family stories don't end here. The next coin has a legacy that spans generations. Let's move on to our fourth coin. Let's look at the numbers. In 2014, while Wall Street was riding the longest bull market in modern history and the S&P 500 was printing record closes nearly every week, a different kind of asset was quietly entering circulation, one that most investors would walk right past on their way to check their portfolio. I'm talking about the Arches National Park Quarter, released on August 25, 2014, as the 23rd coin in the United States Mint's America the Beautiful Quarters program. And here's what makes this coin worth a market analyst's attention. It was struck during a period of extraordinary financial turbulence. It carries design elements that make specific era varieties genuinely scarce, and the pricing on those varieties has not yet caught up to their actual rarity. This is not a coin you buy to get rich. This is a coin you find in your change, examine with an investor's eye, and hold because the fundamentals support a position that most of the market has not yet recognized. Here's the market context nobody considers. The year 2014 was a strange one for precious metals and for the broader economy. Gold had peaked at over $1,900 an ounce in September 2011 and had been in a steady, painful decline for nearly 3 years, settling around $1,200 by the time the Arches quarter was released. Silver had crashed from its 2011 high of nearly $49 an ounce to around $19, devastating the positions of retail investors who had piled into silver ETFs and physical bullion during the panic years following the 2008 financial crisis. The Federal Reserve was winding down its third round of quantitative easing, and interest rates were still pinned at zero, which meant that yield-starved investors were pouring money into equities and pushing the stock market to valuations that even bullish analysts were beginning to question. In that environment, an environment of surging stocks and cratering metals, the mint was producing billions of quarters, and nobody was thinking about them as assets. They were transactional instruments. They were liquidity. They were the pennies and quarters and dimes that moved through the economy without anyone considering that a small fraction of them might carry a premium that would outperform the S&P 500 over the next decade. The Arches National Park quarter itself features one of the most visually striking designs in the entire America the Beautiful series. The reverse depicts Delicate Arch, the iconic 65-foot-tall freestanding sandstone arch that sits in the Devil's Garden area of Arches National Park in eastern Utah, rendered with a level of geological detail that makes the rock face look almost tactile. The arch is shown against a backdrop of the La Salle Mountains with a foreground of rugged desert terrain and a small cluster of vegetation. The inscription Arches appears along the top border with Utah beneath it, 2014 at the bottom, and E Pluribus Unum positioned along the lower right edge. The design was created by Barbara Fox, an artist whose work on the America the Beautiful series has been widely praised for its compositional balance and its ability to render complex natural landscapes within the confined canvas of a $quarter reverse. The engraving was executed by Joseph Mena, a sculptor engraver at the United States Mint, who was among the first artists to work extensively with digital sculpting tools in the mint's production process. The result is a coin that, from a purely aesthetic standpoint, stands above many of its peers in the series, and in the numismatic market, aesthetic appeal drives demand and demand drives price. Let's look at the numbers on production, because in any market analysis, supply is the foundational metric. The Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 316 million Arches quarters for circulation. The Denver Mint struck approximately 280 million. That is roughly 596 million coins entering the economy, a substantial float by any measure, and one that places the Arches quarter firmly in the category of high-supply, high-liquidity assets. When you have nearly 600 million units of anything in circulation, the common example is by definition not scarce. It is the penny stock of the numismatic world, widely available, easily acquired, and carrying a market price that reflects that abundance. And that is exactly what we see with circulated Arches quarters. A coin that has been through the wear of commerce, handled, spent, dropped, exposed to the elements, trades at its face value of 25 cents. That is the market floor. It is the bid price. It is what you would receive if you walked into any coin shop in America with a handful of circulated Arches quarters and asked for an offer. The market is efficient at this level because the supply is so overwhelming that there is no inefficiency to exploit. A circulated Arches quarter is a quarter, and treating it as anything else is a misallocation of your analytical resources. This is where the market inefficiency lies, and it is the reason I am spending your time on this coin rather than moving on to something more obviously glamorous. Within that population of 596 million circulation strikes, there exists a small and quantifiable subset of coins that carry striking errors, coins that were produced when something went wrong on the mint floor, when a die cracked, when a collar failed, when a blank was misaligned. And these coins represent a market segment where the supply is genuinely constrained, and the pricing has not yet adjusted to reflect that constraint. The most significant of these for the Arches quarter is the broad-struck error. A broad-struck coin is produced when the retaining collar, the metal ring that holds the coin blank in position during the strike and forms the reeded edge, fails to engage, and the coin is struck without lateral confinement. The metal flows outward, producing a coin that is wider and thinner than standard, with the design extending beyond the normal rim and the edge appearing smooth and irregular. A broad-struck 2014 Arches quarter in circulated condition sells for between $50 and $150. In uncirculated condition, meaning the coin was struck, never released into general commerce and preserved in mint state, the value ranges from $200 to $500, with the most pristine examples reaching higher. The market inefficiency here is that the number of certified broad-struck Arches quarters is extremely small, a handful across all grading services, and yet the pricing remains modest relative to comparable errors from earlier state quarter issues. The scarcity is real. The price has not caught up. That is what an investor calls an opportunity. The off-center strike is another variety where the Arches quarter presents a compelling inefficiency. An off-center strike occurs when the coin blank is not properly seated between the dies, and the design is impressed shifted to one side, leaving a crescent of blank metal exposed on one edge and cutting off a portion of the design on the opposite edge. The severity is measured as a percentage of misalignment, and the higher the percentage, the more dramatic and valuable the result. A 2014 Arches quarter struck 5 to 10% off-center with the date and mint mark still visible, trades in the $100 to $300 range. A coin shifted 15% or more, where a significant portion of the blank surface is exposed and the design is only partially rendered, can command $500 to $1,000, particularly in uncirculated condition. And here is the inefficiency: the population of certified off-center Arches quarters is even smaller than the broad-struck population. We are talking about single-digit numbers of certified examples across all grading services. When an asset has a certified population in the single digits and a price tag of a few $100s, the market has not yet priced in the scarcity. It is trading like a mid-cap when its supply profile suggests it should be trading like a small cap. That gap between supply and price is where return on investment lies. Let's look at the numbers on the silver proof, because this is where the Arches quarter transitions from a circulation asset to a collectible asset with a fundamentally different risk-return profile. The San Francisco Mint produced proof versions of the Arches quarter in two formats, a standard copper-nickel clad proof and a 90% silver proof. The silver proofs were struck on specially prepared planchets using highly polished dies, and they exhibit a deep mirror-like field with frosted design elements that create what the market calls cameo contrast. The silver-proof Arches quarter weighs 6.25 grams, compared to the 5.67 grams of a standard circulation quarter, and its edge is solid silver-white rather than showing the copper-colored layer characteristic of clad coins. In its original government packaging, which includes a presentation case and certificate of authenticity, a silver-proof Arches quarter trades between $15 and $35, but graded at PR69 Deep Cameo by a professional grading service, meaning the coin is nearly perfect, with full cameo contrast and no visible imperfections under 5-power magnification. The value increases to the $50 to $100 range. And at PR70 Deep Cameo, the theoretical perfection grade where no imperfections are visible even under magnification, the value can reach several $100s. The silver proof is not a circulation find. It was never released into the money supply. But it is the benchmark for quality in this issue, and it is the version of the coin that serious collectors pursue when they want the absolute finest example of the Arches design. Your due diligence checklist is this, and I want you to treat it with the same rigor you would apply to evaluating any position in your portfolio. Step 1. Establish the asset's identity. Confirm that the coin is a 2014 Arches National Park quarter by examining the reverse for the delicate arch design, the word Arches along the top border, Utah beneath it, and the date 2014 at the bottom. Confirm the obverse shows George Washington with the standard America the Beautiful quarter obverse design. Step 2. Determine the mint of origin. The mint mark appears on the obverse below the motto "In God We Trust." A small p indicates Philadelphia, a small d indicates Denver, an s indicates San Francisco, which means you're looking at a proof issue, not a circulation strike, and your valuation framework changes accordingly. Step 3. Assess the edge. Hold the coin between your thumb and forefinger and rotate it slowly under a direct light source. A standard circulation Arches quarter has a reeded edge with uniform vertical grooves. If the edge is smooth, if the reading is missing in sections, or if the coin appears wider than a normal quarter, you may have a broad-struck error. Document the observation. Step 4. Measure the diameter. A standard quarter measures 24.3 millimeters. If your coin exceeds that measurement, even by a fraction of a millimeter, you are looking at a potential broad strike and that coin warrants further evaluation. Step 5. Examine the reverse under magnification. A 5-power loop is sufficient for initial screening. Look at delicate arch. Are the rock formations sharp and detailed, or have they been worn smooth? Look at the La Salle Mountains in the background. Are the ridgelines crisp? Look at the desert vegetation in the foreground. Are the individual plants distinguishable? The sharper and more complete these details, the higher the condition grade, and condition is the primary driver of value in the numismatic market. Step 6. Look for die cracks. These appear as thin raised lines of metal crossing the surface of the design, and they are most commonly found around the arch itself or along the mountain ridgeline. A prominent die crack is a documented variety that adds value. Step 7. Check for off-center striking. Look at the rim. Is it uniform all the way around, or is there a crescent of blank metal on one side with the design shifted toward the other? Any visible off-centering is significant and should be documented with photographs. Step 8. Weigh the coin. A clad quarter weighs 5.67 grams. A silver proof weighs 6.25 grams. If your coin deviates significantly from either standard, you have an anomaly worth investigating. Step 9. Assess the overall condition. Compare your coin to graded examples on major numismatic databases. If your coin appears to grade MS65 or higher, meaning it shows no significant wear and only minor contact marks, it may be worth submitting to a professional grading service for certification, which adds liquidity and marketability to the asset. Step 10. Do not clean the coin. This is the equivalent of defacing a deed. It destroys provenance, reduces value, and in some cases eliminates it entirely. A coin's natural tunning is part of its market profile, and cleaning removes that profile permanently. Place the coin in a non-abrasive holder and label it with all relevant data. Here's the market context nobody considers when it comes to the America the Beautiful series as a whole, and it directly affects the valuation of every coin within it, including the Arches quarter. The America the Beautiful Quarters program ran from 2010 to 2021, producing 56 quarters, one for each state, the District of Columbia, and each United States territory, each featuring a national park or national site. The program was the successor to the enormously successful 50-state quarters program, which had run from 1999 to 2008 and had generated an estimated 140 million new collectors. But the America the Beautiful program never achieved the same cultural penetration. By 2014, when the Arches quarter was released, public interest in the program had waned significantly. The novelty had faded. The cardboard maps were no longer on every refrigerator. Children who had collected state quarters in 1999 were now adults with mortgages and student loans, and they were not collecting park quarters. What this means from a market perspective is that the collector base for the America the Beautiful series is smaller than the collector base for the state quarter series, and that smaller base translates into lower demand and lower prices, even for coins that are objectively scarcer than their state quarter counterparts. This is the definition of a market inefficiency. The supply of high-grade and error Arches quarters is lower than the supply of comparable state quarters, but the prices are lower because the demand pool is smaller. When, and I would argue this is a question of when, not if, the America the Beautiful series gains broader collector recognition, the prices on these scarcity-driven varieties will adjust upward. That is the thesis. That is the investment case. The historical context of 2014 extends beyond the metals market and into the broader financial landscape, in ways that matter for understanding the environment in which this coin was produced. The year 2014 saw the continuation of the bull market that had begun in March 2009, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average closing above 17,000 for the first time in July, and the S&P 500 gaining nearly 14% for the year. But it was also a year of significant global economic disruption. The price of crude oil collapsed from over $100 a barrel in June to below $60 by December, devastating the energy sector and sending shockwaves through the high-yield bond market. The Russian ruble crashed as Western sanctions, imposed in response to the annexation of Crimea, combined with the oil price collapse to create a full-blown currency crisis. The European Central Bank was moving toward quantitative easing, and Japan was in the midst of Abenomics. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's aggressive monetary and fiscal stimulus program designed to break the country out of 2 decades of deflation. In this environment of global monetary experimentation and asset price inflation, the United States Mint was quietly producing quarters that carried intrinsic metal value far below their face value, a phenomenon that economists call seigniorage, and that represents one of the most reliable profit centers in the federal government. Every quarter the Mint produced cost less than 25 cents to manufacture, and the difference between production cost and face value was pure profit to the Treasury. In 2014, that profit was substantial, because the Mint was producing billions of quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies, and the public was absorbing them into circulation and collections without redemption. The Arches quarter was, in a very real sense, a government-issued financial instrument designed to generate revenue, and the rare varieties within that issuance are the unintended consequences of a production process that, like any manufacturing operation, occasionally produces defects. The liquidity profile of the Arches quarter is an important consideration for any investor evaluating this coin as a position. In its common circulated form, the Arches quarter is maximally liquid, it spends at any cash register in the country, and its bid-ask spread is effectively zero because the bid and the ask are both 25 cents. This is the penny stock version of the coin, the one that trades at par with no premium and no friction. But as you move up the quality spectrum, liquidity changes. An uncirculated Arches quarter graded MS65 has a modest premium, perhaps $5 to $15, and reasonable liquidity, because there is a collector market for certified uncirculated America the Beautiful quarters, though it is not deep. An MS67 or MS68 example has a higher premium, $50 to several $100s, but thinner liquidity because the buyer pool narrows as the price increases. A broad struck or off-center error has even thinner liquidity because the buyer pool is limited to error specialists. And while those specialists will pay strong prices for the right coin, finding them requires access to the right channels, major auction houses, specialized dealer networks, and online numismatic marketplaces. The silver-proof and original packaging has good liquidity at the $15 to $35 level, because the market for proof sets is well established and the buyer pool is broad. But a PR70 Deep Cameo Silverproof, the top of the quality pyramid, has thin liquidity, because the buyer pool is limited to advanced collectors who are willing to pay a significant premium for theoretical perfection. Understanding this liquidity spectrum is essential for anyone considering a position in this coin, because the return on investment is only realizable if there is a buyer when you want to sell, and the buyer pool varies dramatically depending on what you are holding. The designer and engraver of the Arches quarter are part of the coin's market narrative, because in numismatics, provenance and attribution matter. Barbara Fox, who created the design, is a painter and illustrator whose work has been featured on several United States mint coins and medals. Her approach to the Arches quarter was notable for its geological precision. Delicate arch is rendered not as a generic arch, but as the specific, recognizable formation that it is, with the characteristic curvature, the textured sandstone surface, and the contextual framing of the surrounding landscape that places the arch in its actual geographic setting. This level of specificity matters to collectors because a coin that accurately depicts a real place has a narrative value that a generic design does not, and narrative value translates into collector interest, which translates into demand, which translates into price support. Joseph Mena, the engraver, brought Fox's design to the steel dies with a level of detail that is particularly evident on high-grade examples. The texture of the sandstone, the individual ridgelines of the mountains, and the sparse desert vegetation are all rendered with a crispness that reflects the mint's increasingly sophisticated production capabilities in the 2010s. For an investor, the quality of the design and the skill of the engraver are not aesthetic footnotes. They are fundamental factors that influence long-term demand, and long-term demand is what supports price appreciation. The condition spectrum of the Arches quarter is where most of the market's pricing inefficiency concentrates, and it deserves a detailed breakdown because it is the framework within which every valuation decision is made. A circulated Arches quarter, one that has been handled, spent, and exposed to the friction of commerce, shows wear on the highest points of the design. On the obverse, Washington's cheek and jaw flat, the hair details soften and the lettering around the rim may show abrasion. On the reverse, delicate arch loses its sandstone texture, the mountain ridgelines blur, and the foreground vegetation becomes indistinct. This is the market floor, 25 cents, no premium, no upside. An uncirculated coin, one that was struck at the mint, placed in a mint-sewn bag and never released into circulation, retains full detail. The arch shows its surface texture, the mountains are crisp, and Washington's portrait retains its original relief. Within the uncirculated range, the grade depends on contact marks, the tiny nicks that occur when coins strike each other during handling and transportation. An MS63 Arches quarter, uncirculated but with visible marks, trades for a few dollars above face. An MS65, uncirculated with scattered marks, trades for $5 to $15. An MS67, uncirculated with very few marks, trades for $50 to $150. An MS68 or higher, essentially mark-free under magnification, can reach several $100s, with the finest known examples approaching $1,000 at auction. The population of Arches quarters graded MS68 or higher is extremely small across all grading services, and that small population is the scarcity that supports the premium pricing at the top of the condition spectrum. The sensory experience of evaluating an Arches quarter is part of what makes this coin feel like a tangible asset rather than an abstract financial instrument, and that tangibility is part of its appeal. There's the weight of the coin in your palm, 5.67 grams of copper and nickel for a clad example, slightly heavier for a silver proof. There's the cool metallic feel of the surface against your fingertip when you hold it by the edge, the way the reading catches against your skin. There's the visual impact of the delicate arch design when you hold the coin at an angle to the light, and watch the sandstone texture emerge from the field, the arch seeming to stand in three-dimensional relief against the mirror-bright background of a proof example. There's the sound the coin makes when placed on a glass surface, the bright clear ring of a clad coin versus the softer, more sustained resonance of silver, a difference that experienced numismatists use as a preliminary authentication method. Every one of these sensory data points is part of the due diligence process, part of the evaluation that determines whether the coin in your hand is a market floor common or a market ceiling rarity, and the ability to gather and interpret this data is what separates the casual holder from the informed investor. The broader investment thesis on the Arches Quarter, and on the America the Beautiful series more generally, rests on a convergence of factors that, taken together, suggest the current pricing understates the long-term value of the rare varieties within this issue. First, the supply of high-grade and error examples is demonstrably small, as evidenced by the certified populations reported by major grading services. Second, the collector base for the America the Beautiful series is currently smaller than the collector base for the 50 state quarters program, which means demand is suppressed relative to the state quarters. But the state quarter program has been over for nearly 2 decades, and its collectors are aging, while the America the Beautiful program is more recent and its collector base is still forming. Third, the designs in the America the Beautiful series are, from an aesthetic standpoint, generally considered superior to the state quarter designs. They feature landscapes and landmarks rather than state symbols, and they tend to be more visually complex and more rewarding to examine closely. Fourth, the production quality of the America the Beautiful quarters improved over the course of the program, as the Mint refined its processes and adopted digital technologies, which means that the later issues in the series, and the Arches Quarter released in 2014, sits in the middle of the program, benefited from a more mature production environment. These factors do not guarantee price appreciation, because no investment thesis is without risk, but they do suggest that the risk-return profile of a carefully selected Arches Quarter variety, particularly a certified error or a high-grade uncirculated example, is more favorable than the current market pricing implies. Let's look at the numbers one final time because every investment decision ultimately comes down to the math. A circulated Arches Quarter, 25 cents, market floor, no premium, no upside. A broad-struck error in uncirculated condition, $200 to $500, an off-center strike at 15% or greater, $500 to $1,000. A silver proof in original packaging, $15 to $35. A PR70 deep cameo silver proof, several $100. An MS68 uncirculated circulation strike, several $100 to $1,000. The spread between the market floor and the market ceiling on this coin is enormous, from 25 cents to over $1,000. And the difference between those two endpoints is determined entirely by factors that are observable, documentable, and verifiable through the due diligence process I have outlined. This is what makes the Arches Quarter, and the America the Beautiful series more broadly, a genuinely interesting asset class for the numismatic investor. The common coin is so common that nobody looks twice. The rare coin is so rare that almost nobody has one. And the distance between those two realities is bridged by nothing more than attention, knowledge, and the willingness to examine what you are holding before you let it pass through your fingers. But here is the thing, and this is where I want you to lean in, because this is not a footnote, this is the whole thesis in a single sentence. The coins that are sitting in your change jar right now, the ones you have been ignoring for years, the ones that look like nothing because they are so familiar, those coins are the ones that somebody else is going to find and grade, and sell for hundreds or thousands of dollars, and that somebody is going to be the person who took the time to look when everyone else did not. The market inefficiency does not correct itself, it corrects when a buyer steps in. And the buyer who steps in is the one who did the due diligence, ran the checklist, and found the anomaly that the market missed. So go to your change, pull out every quarter, look at the edge, look at the rim, look at the design, and if you find something that does not look right, something that is wider or shifted, or cracked or heavier than it should be, you may be holding a coin that the market has not yet priced correctly, and you may be the one who corrects that inefficiency. If this analysis changed the way you think about the coins in your pocket, hit that subscribe button so you never miss another breakdown. Drop a comment below with the rarest coin you have ever found in circulation. I read every single one. And give this video a like because the algorithm rewards engagement, and engagement is what keeps this channel bringing you the market analysis that nobody else is willing to do. The next coin is already in production, and trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming.